Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Hey guys, I hope you had a good evening. Hopefully, StreamYard will behave better today and we will have a better day. My name is Debbie. Welcome to my channel. This is part 77 of the Phil Spector trial. We are on the defense's case in chief and we are on part. I'm not exactly sure on what part of Dr. Warner Spitz we're on because I forgot to write it down. You guys are shocked, aren't you? Hey, Jill, we will miss you. Go have fun with your sister-in-law. I hope everything's okay. Okay, so let's read what Judy has for us this morning first before we try to figure out where we left off. In trial 2, a jury found Spector guilty of second-degree murder, and in May 2009, he was sentenced to 19 years to life in prison. His health later deteriorated, and in 2014, he was transferred to a prison-run medical facility where he remained until his death. So, good morning, Terry. Good morning, Judy. Good morning, Jill. Jill's leaving us to take our sister to the doctor, but she will be back later. I haven't seen Nancy in a while, or Ardo. We're missing some of our regulars. Okay. I have the timestamp of 43:54 written down. Only problem is I don't remember if we were on part 6 or part 7. Do you remember, Judy, if we were on part 6 or part 7 of his testimony? Oh, you did, Terry? Well, I am missing him. Bad. So if you see him again, tell him that I need to see his face in my chat because I miss him. Yeah, I thought it was 6 too. So if it's not, if you guys think we've seen this before, holler and I'll switch it to the 7. But I think we're right.
Do you agree that in fact the back spatter in this case would generally be limited?
The back spatter would be that which occurs from a wound by a 38 caliber missile into an area that is highly vascularized. That means it's got a lot of blood vessels. It's got a lot of arterial blood supply, which is under arterial pressure, which is the type of pressure that yields if you cut an artery, that easily will go on, to a 12-foot ceiling. I've seen it happen.
Did she, doctor?
I'm sorry?
She didn't cut an artery, did she?
No, she didn't?
No, there was no missile that cut an artery in Lana Clarkson, was there?
Well, that's new to me.
So that's sort of irrelevant, isn't it?
No, that's not irrelevant at all, because there is no, you mean it didn't cut the aorta, or it didn't cut the carotid artery, but
Correct.
It cut arteries.
Correct, it didn't cut the carotid artery that you're talking about spraying to the ceiling. I mean,
excuse me, sir, but every artery has the same pressure. The smaller arteries don't have any less pressure than the big arteries.
So doctor, where's the blood on the ceiling at this crime scene?
I'm not suggesting that there is, because the face didn't point to the ceiling.
Well, where's the blood across the carpet on the crime scene? If that's going out like a garden hose or like a fireman's hose, as you said, where's all the blood all over the crime scene with this fire hose of blood just spraying everything? Where is that?
That is the blood spatter.
Okay, I remember this.
Did you not?
I remember this because I remember saying something about arterial spray being way different. I mean, that it is blood spatter, but it's way different than like little tiny mist of. Yeah. Yeah. I remember saying arterial spray and like blood spatter is different. Okay. So maybe it was part 7 we were on. I need to start writing down parts and not just timestamps. Oh, wow, look at that. I clicked right on the exact right timestamp. How many times is that ever going to happen again? Never.
Three in Pasadena. Philip Spector, after a night of drinking with Dorothy Melvin,
Yes, this is where we were.
was
Okay.
found a handgun at the car. When he turned on and actually the gun ordered her. When she tried to leave, he refused to let her leave, ordered her to go, and then at one point finally allowed her to leave, again at gunpoint. She jumps into the car, tries to drive down the driveway, and then Philip Spector again follows her with yet a second gun, this time a shotgun, in a threatening manner. Are you aware of that incident?
Yes, I'm aware of it.
What's the objection?
Since fact, not in evidence, also.
The objections are overruled.
You're aware of that incident?
Yes.
Are you aware of an incident of 1995?
Does Fiddler sustain any of the defense's objections ever? Ever?
At the Carlisle Hotel in New York with Stephanie Jennings, wherein Mr. Spector again had been drinking throughout the evening, had become inebriated. When Stephanie Jennings refused to go to his hotel room, an argument. When she decided to leave, he walked away, pulled a gun, then her at gunpoint, and wouldn't let her leave the hotel room, finally until the police were called, as he was waving the gun and pointing it at her in a threatening manner and ranting and raving. Are you aware of that incident
Yes,
as well?
we discussed that yesterday, and you even asked me whether I have done that. And I told you, no, I haven't done that. I've been married for 45 years.
Are you aware?
God help me.
Are you aware of that
if
incident?
I did that. I'm sorry?
Are you aware of that incident?
Can I just have a continuing?
Yes. We have gone through this yesterday, and I told you opinion about these cases.
Are you aware of a 1988 in Diane Ogden here in California? And Mr. Spector, actually, there's 2 incidents. The first one involved Mr. Spector drinking. Diane Ogden wanted to leave the house. She actually put her purse on her arm and walked toward the foyer of that particular house. The defendant forced her down and would not let her leave. While he had her seated there with her purse on her arm, Dr. Spitz, he began pressing over parts of her face, head, neck, cheeks, nose. At one point, he let her go. And then 2 weeks later, the same type of incident began to happen. He had been drinking. She wanted to leave. She expressed her desire to leave. And he pulled what she described as an Uzi and chased her out to her car, began banging on the window on the car until she drove away. Are you aware of those incidents?
I'm aware of them.
And finally, are you aware of an incident in 1992 involving Melissa Grosvenor at Mr. Spector's Pasadena house after a night where Mr. Spector had been drinking? She wanted to leave. He pulled out a gun, pointed it at her, got directly in her face, pointing the gun directly at her forehead about 2 inches away, forced her to sit down in a chair, and forced her to sit in that chair all night long at gunpoint until finally the next morning she was allowed to leave. Are you aware of that incident as well?
Yes.
Did you consider, Dr. Spitz, Mr. Spector's history of violence with women, history of violence involving guns, history of violence involving drinking and women and guns when you rendered your conclusions and opinions in this case?
I considered all these episodes and considered the rest of the evidence and came to my conclusion.
And you considered these, ignored them for purposes of your conclusion, and then rendered the opinion that you gave us yesterday, correct?
That misstates the evidence.
It does. The way the question was phrased, I'm going to sustain the objection.
Not in the history, the part of the defendant. The fact that Lana Clarkson was a stranger to the home, the fact that she was a woman alone, the fact that Mr. Spector had drinking and drinking and drinking and drinking throughout the night, the fact that she was seated in a chair by the back door with her purse on her shoulder, and she was shot with Philip Spector's gun out of Philip Spector's drawer in Philip Spector's foyer with Philip Spector's bullets. Notwithstanding all of that, the totality of the circumstances, your opinion is she committed suicide. Is that correct?
My opinion is that I wouldn't say that she committed suicide. I would say that she shot herself.
And yesterday, Dr. Spitz, you agreed, did you not, that if in fact the physical evidence showed that Philip Spector was close enough to have fired the gun, you would have to reevaluate that opinion, correct?
I'd have to and I did reevaluate it, and I'd like to read you how I reevaluate.
I'm not asking you to read me anything. I'm asking you if yesterday, just harken back to yesterday, if yesterday you testified, in fact, that if Philip Spector was close enough to have fired the weapon, if the physical evidence suggested that, you would need to reevaluate your opinion as a forensic pathologist, correct? Is that what you testified to yesterday?
I did indeed,
Thank
and
you.
I did. I did reevaluate my conclusions, and I did come to the conclusion that my opinion, as originally rendered, is correct.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Just to follow up on that, Dr. Spitz, I believe if I understood Mr. Jackson's questions yesterday, that if you assume for purposes of the question that something is true, that Mr. Spector was within 2 feet or arm's reach of Lana Clarkson, would you reevaluate your opinion? In other words, he asked you to assume that fact to be true. Do you remember that being your question? Okay, he did tell you need or not on the physical evidence in this particular case. You look at that and then reevaluate your opinion.
Absolutely.
Well, there's no support that he was within arm's reach, or that he had, or that he was, with the exception of one speck of gunpowder on one of his sleeves that was confirmed to be gunpowder, which could have been very easily contamination. With the exception of that, there is absolutely no support to that.
Okay.
In fact, there's support to the contrary.
Okay, well, let's go into that then. You were asked to assess within 2 feet. Let's just say 2 feet, which is pretty close. That's basically 24 inches. Just assume that fact to be true. In the other case, does that is your testimony that your opinion would be the same, whether he was 2 feet, 4 feet, 6 feet away?
He has no support for that in terms of blood, gunpowder residue, but is present on her. So since it's present on the deceased, it should be present on him, but it's not present on him.
Okay, I want to go through that, and I want to now first, well, let me ask you this, is part of the evidence that you looked at, Mr. Jackson talked about blood on Mr. Spector's jacket, specifically what the blood was on his jacket.
Jennifer?
Blood, but on the left jacket, something about like that, and on the sleeve there was wiping.
Okay, let's get Exhibit V to the 9 up and ask if you could take a look at this particular photograph. V to the ninth. Dr. Spitz, do you recognize what this exhibit shows?
This is
By Stuart James?
yes,
And you mentioned in some of the answers you gave to Mr. Jackson that you were familiar with Stuart James. You actually read
I do.
and Henry Lee, correct?
Yes, I did.
And you also talked with Mr. James about this jacket, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
And did he tell you that this was his diagram where he put whether something was a spatter versus a smear?
Yes, if you search.
That's yours.
Just want to think about something for a second. Stan,
I want you to assume for purpose of this, and that this diagram was prepared by Stuart Spatter expert. That it was true that on the right sleeve that's shown here, that there were no blood spatters as shown on the front portion of this jacket, on the right. Okay, is that your understanding from the evidence in this case?
That's my.
I swear, y'all, I did it. I fixed everything before I shut the computer off last night.
Dr. Spitz, was it your understanding that the way I described the spatters on the jacket, as far as the right arm and the left arm, was the way that the jacket was found, had transfer stain spatters? Is that, in your opinion, consistent with respect to firing the gun while wearing that jacket?
Objection. No foundation. He is not a spatter expert.
I'll allow, however, he can still offer, and I'll allow him to answer the question. He may answer.
With regards, you're asking me whether the transfer stains on the sleeves assistant with him firing the gun.
No, the stains on the sleeves, yes. Whatever
The
they are.
stains on the sleeve show transfer stains on both sleeves, on the back of both sleeves, and a blood spatter on the back of the right arm back here. And this suggests to me that his arm was raised at the time, like I'm showing you now, like I'm doing across my face.
For somebody that's not a backspatter expert, they sure have been asking him a lot of questions about backspatter. Yeah. That's a good question. My point about these experts, they just make things, but I think in the beginning that these guys, they got there for a reason, right? Like, they got to be these big experts, renowned experts, however you want to call them, for a reason. Like, right? Like, they know what they're talking about. But I think there comes a point, I really do think there comes a point where they just think that everything they say, people are just going to believe. And then I don't want to say they're hired guns. I hate it when it gets insinuated that they get paid to say what people want them to say. But I think there comes a point where they just believe their own BS and they just say what they want to say and think that everyone's going to believe it. Because that's a ridiculous statement. How do you accidentally shoot yourself in the mouth? That's a ridiculous statement. Now, if they were struggling over the gun, that could be an accidental shot. These old guys drive me crazy.
Okay. Is it consistent with him firing the gun? That piece
No,
of
it's
physical.
not.
Okay. Did you consider that
I consider that, yes.
as part of all the physical?
That's why I'm suggesting to you that he did fire the gun.
We're not going to have any left.
And that's part of the physical evidence that you considered along with all the other physical evidence.
That's part of the physical evidence that I considered.
Dr. Spitz, with reference to all of the facts that Mr. Jackson talked about, you talked about when you do your work as a forensic pathologist, you take all the facts or circumstances into consideration,
100%.
and then you come to a conclusion. You mentioned that sometimes statements are not conclusive. What's your experience with that? Why do you make that
Well,
claim?
because people make statements that turn out to be either interpretable in different ways or that they aren't true. They feel guilty about something or other, then they make statements. But the statements does not implicate them as the culprit in the case.
In other words, the physical evidence and the other circumstances.
Exculpates them. The
I
physical
think-
evidence shows that what he just did.
I think I just killed someone. That pretty much sums it up. Like, okay.
It may be true in some fictitious way, but this didn't happen.
Were you aware of, in addition to the statements that Mr. Jackson talked to you about, that the driver said something about him having a problem with English as part of his explanation of what he heard?
I understand that may be a possibility.
Okay. Essentially, if you just accepted a statement and then concluded and made it a examiner, if you just accepted the statement?
We wouldn't need medical examiners. Made in most every case.
Now, if I understand your testimony, Dr. Spitz, when you first were retained, it was a number of years ago by Mr. Shapiro, is that correct?
Yes.
And you were given a whole bunch of materials, a mountain of materials, case materials, transcripts. Your billing and your time that you've spent on this case is partially devoted to looking through all that. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you bill for all that time from the time you first started till now. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And basically, before you started, did you have an opinion as to whether this was a homicide or a suicide, a self-inflicted wound, an accident, or anything such as that? Before you look at that material?
Started?
Yes.
No.
Okay. Did you have an opinion based upon the fact that you were hired by attorneys that represent Mr. Spector, that you were going to come to a particular conclusion?
No.
And if the
Absolutely
physical
not.
evidence showed that this was an accident, you would have come to that opinion if that were the case? Is that correct?
No, that is not.
Also speculation of what he might do.
No, I believe he's just as to his mindset is what the question is. The objections are overruled.
Before you saw the materials and the evidence, did you have an opinion as to whether this was an accident, a homicide, or a suicide? Any?
No, I did not.
Okay. Now, when you looked at the materials, you knew that from the physical evidence that there was evidence that this was an inside the mouth gunshot wound. Is that correct?
That is true.
And there's absolutely no question about that, correct?
There's no question about it.
If that's the only thing that you knew, the only thing, you knew nothing else, would you be able to make a determination that this was a self-inflicted wound if there was no other evidence at all? None?
I would
Sure,
conclude
that's what happened.
that
Sure.
This is
Still his fault.
likely or probably a self-inflicted wound based on statistics, but that needs to be confirmed in other ways.
Meaning you need to look at the physical
I
evidence.
need to look at everything before I can come to that definitive conclusion.
And you did that in this particular case, and you've actually come to an opinion to, the way you phrase it, to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as a pathologist that this was a self-inflicted wound.
That's my opinion.
I want to go through some of the facts and circumstances. Do all the facts and circumstances weigh equally? In other words, one fact, one circumstance, do they all count for the same thing, or do you kind of weigh them and give one or
No,
more?
there are findings which have more weight and others which have less weight, significantly less weight.
Okay. Now, you were talking with Mr. Jackson yesterday when he asked you that hypothetical question. He asked you to reevaluate it if you assumed that Mr. Spector was within 2 feet of Ms. Clarkson when the shot was fired. He asked you to assume that to be true. And you did reevaluate it, and you said that you kind of made some notes as to why you came to the same opinion after you went through that reevaluation process. Can you explain what you did and what reasons you give for that particular?
Well, I made a list, like I usually do when I evaluate any case. I make a list of what the probabilities are or what the major findings are.
Okay.
And the major findings are that there's no blood spatter below the elbows in Mr. Spector, on Mr. Spector's jacket.
Okay. That's
No
a fact.
blood spatter stains.
Okay.
There's no blood spatter on the right side of Mr. There's only blood spatter on the left, so that the left side was exposed to Miss Clarkson's face, as I described earlier. In my opinion, at least part of that, if not all of it, because it's all in a limited space, is or could have been sustained by her coughing this blood up, coughing or expelling it from the oral cavity. The single spatter on the back of the right upper arm could have come there in several ways, but one way is that the arm was exposed by raising the arm across his face, like I'm showing now.
Okay.
The spatter, by the way, was somewhere here,
Above the elbow on the back.
above the elbow in the back.
Is that inconsistent with somebody firing a gun
Objection.
with their right hand?
Objection. This calls for, there's no foundation for it. He's not a backspatter expert.
No, but he has made and used certain things to form his opinion. It goes to the weight of his opinion as opposed to whether he can offer the opinion. I'm going to allow him to answer.
It is consistent with him not holding the gun, because not firing the gun. Holding the gun, I don't know, but and at what time. But at the time of discharge, his gun was not, his hand was not the one that fired it, because otherwise I'd fail to see how that spatter would come there.
Okay, and is it also your understanding that Mr. Spector is right-handed?
That's my understanding.
Okay, continue on with your list then.
There's no gunpowder residue or particles of gunpowder on the white jacket. We already discussed that. There's no gunpowder residue on the shirt that he was wearing. There's no blood spatter on the pants. No burnt or unburnt gunpowder on the pants. No tissue on the pants, no tissue or blood spatter that I'm aware of in the cuffs of the pants, no evidence of blood spatter on the shoes or socks, no gunpowder residue in the ears, in the ear canals. No gunpowder residue in the nostrils, that is in the nose.
I need clarification. It's not even an
Objection. There's no, he's just giving his answer.
Let me hear what he's saying, and then I'll rule on it. Go ahead.
Clarification, ear canals of whom?
I think the bottom line is you can ask that on recross. He's giving the basis of what his opinion is. All right. At this point, we're going to break for the noon hour.
Okay.
Keep in mind the admonition, ladies and gentlemen, 1:30 this afternoon. Thank you. Now we'll take it up later.
Quit buffering. Quit it. Yeah, your question was perfectly timed, Terry.
Jacket, then you had talked about his shirt didn't have blood spatter.
The summary is unnecessary.
I think unless he has problems, just go ahead and ask him a question.
Okay. And then you were continuing to go through the various clothing that was being worn by Ms. Spector as well. You had some, continue that you remember your place?
Yes, I stopped.
Why don't we start with the shirt? The shirt that Mr. Spector was wearing.
There's no evidence of burnt or unburnt particle tissue on the shirt, and there's no evidence of blood spatter on the shirt.
Okay, and just let me stop you as you're going through that list. This is the black shirt that Mr. Spector was wearing, is that correct?
That's correct.
And if somebody shoots a gun in general, setting aside the circumstances of this case, if for example, I was wearing a shirt and I was wearing a coat, could blood spatters go inside the sleeve and get on a shirt? If I have my shirt exposed, even though I have a coat on, could blood spatters get on the shirt?
The middle is open.
Okay, and so...
And everything, I mean, we're talking about small flying objects, and whatever is covered will be protected, but whatever is not covered, like in here, that's not covered. That goes right in here.
Okay,
and whatever is exposed in the middle is available for for being hit.
Okay, continue on.
The pants show no evidence of gunpowder residue, no tissue on the pants, and no blood spatter on the pants. There's no evidence of blood spatter on the shoes. There's no evidence of gunshot residue in the ears and nostrils. I'm not aware that that was tested for, but if it wasn't tested for, it probably should have been tested for, but it wasn't, or I think it wasn't, but there's no evidence that anybody brought forth that there was evidence of gunpowder residue about the ears. On the ears, you would have seen it.
Now, you're talking about when Mr. Spector went and got this examination done by some
Right.
nurse?
Right,
Okay,
by a sane nurse.
Okay, a sane nurse, a sexual assault nurse examiner?
Yes,
You know, can you-
examined him and took specimens. Those sane nurses, if they're the same as what we have in Michigan, they would give him a total external physical.
Okay, and they would look for material like in his hair, on his face, things like that?
They'd look for anything that doesn't belong there.
Okay, very good. They trace evidence, essentially.
Yes, that's the same. We lecture to sane nurses, so I know what they know.
Okay, very good. Go ahead.
There was no evidence of blood in the hair, and there was only a single specific particle of gunpowder residue on one of Mr. Spector's hands.
Okay, was that significant, Dr. Spitz?
It was significant in that a single particle in and of itself is of no other significance than suggesting that this was contamination.
Okay, continue on.
Of course, we all know that this was an intraoral gunshot wound, testified before, in excess of 90%, 99% self-inflicted.
Dr. Spitz, let me ask you a question about the interoral gunshot wound. The fact that it was straight in the mouth, in other words, it didn't go from left to right, that it had a little upward trajectory. In other words, that it did that also, did you factor those circumstances in? The way that the gun was in the mouth?
The usual, when we say an intraoral gunshot wound being almost characteristic for a self-inflicted wound, is usually an upward trajectory, as it was in this case.
And it wasn't crooked. In other words, it wasn't left or right, as if somebody may have just
No,
randomly.
it was straight front to back.
And it was consistent with somebody holding the weapon straight back in the throat.
Yes.
Okay.
The way somebody would hold a gun to their own face would be within the midline. The characteristic way, I mean, the easiest, the simplest is front to back. Most of them, by far, the gunshot wounds in the mouth are midline or just about midline gunshot wounds.
Now, Mr. Jackson has basically asked you a number of questions and basically postulated or suggested with his questions that the gun was shoved in Ms. Clarkson's mouth by Mr. Spector, basically without any question. He's suggesting that to you. I have not finished my question, Your Honor.
And it assumes facts, not on evidence, as to what I was suggesting or postulating. I ask questions.
All right, let him finish, and then we'll have the objection, and then I'll rule on it.
Sure.
Mr. Jackson has asked a number of questions suggesting that Mr. Spector was holding the gun when it was fired. You disagree with that premise, is that
I
true?
do disagree with that premise.
Okay, and part of his suggestion with all of the questions that he asked about prior incidents and poking guns in faces and so forth, is that he shoved the gun in Miss Clarkson's mouth. Is that the way you understood it?
That assumes facts, not on evidence. This is what I was
take out what Mr. Jackson is trying to do, and then you can ask him the question, and we'll go from there.
Let me just ask this type of question. If somebody, just setting aside the facts and circumstances of this case, if somebody shoved in a gun and then fired it, and it was an intraoral wound, in that rare instance that you've talked about, Dr. Spitz, is the likelihood that it was perfectly centered on the midline, not deviating from left to right, is that something that would be even more unusual?
It would be amazing that would be, but there is other factors as well.
Okay, well, what are the other factors, Dr. Spitz?
The other factor is that you have a wound on the right side and you have a wound on the left side. You have perfect symmetry, and in a midline shot, the tongue would be pushed upward and rearward against the palate to sustain those bruises that we were talking about before in the back of the tongue, and also a bruise on one side from hitting the teeth and a bruise on the other side with a small laceration in the middle from impacting one of the molar teeth.
So all of those facts, all of those circumstances deal with the intraoral nature of this wound. Is that correct? All these circumstances that you
Deal
just
with the
mentioned.
intraoral nature of the wound.
Okay. Now,
Good
I think you
question.
left off with self-inflicted wound. What was your next point that you were going to make, Dr. Spitz?
There was abundant gunshot residue on Miss Clarkson's hands, wrists, and jacket. Excuse me. There was tissue on the left cuff buttons. There was tissue on. There was material blown out directly in front of her. There was a broken acrylic fingernail.
Let me stop you for a moment on that point that you just made. Mr. Jackson asked you about whether or not it was theoretically possible that the acrylic could have been broken during a struggle or a fight, and you said that that's always possible, something to that effect, correct?
Yes.
Theoretically possible. When you do an autopsy and when you investigate a death, do you look at whether or not there's any actual evidence of a struggle, such as tissue, blood under fingernails, things of that nature?
I look for that. I looked for that in this case. There is, in my view, no support that there was a struggle in this case. I would have expected a struggle if somebody is holding a gun in anybody else's face. I would have expected a violent struggle under those circumstances because the person is fighting for their life. I've seen that many times. So, no, there was no such evidence in this case.
Okay, so after the acrylic nail point, now this nail, by the way, does it just break off or does it shatter?
No, it breaks off. It's not a big thing. It breaks off or it shatters. It
So
could
we don't
shatter
know.
either way. I don't necessarily know how a small sliver would break again. I'm sure that it happens, but I really cannot say that I have too much experience in acrylic fingernails.
Okay, but it may break into little pieces as opposed
It
to
may
one.
break into little pieces.
Okay, go ahead.
Let me say this, if I may, that what I know of acrylic fingernails is that they are fragile merely by their thickness. They are quite thin.
They're painted on, aren't they?
They're painted on. So if you ask me, do they shatter? Yes, they probably would shatter just because, logic dictates, it's not my knowledge, it's logic dictates that they would shatter because they're so thin.
Okay, and you've got experience in looking at these items before, is that correct?
I'm sorry?
You've got experience in seeing nails and artificial nails and things like that.
I have seen damaged fingernails I've seen damaged real native fingernails. I've seen bruises. I've even seen superficial lacerations as a result of recoil.
Okay, very good. Continue with your list, please.
Excuse me. There was no evidence of outside bruising of the lips. There was no evidence, you already asked me that, but it's on my list here. There was no evidence of foreign DNA under fingernails.
Okay.
There's a discrepancy between the, I don't know how significant that is, but of course, Miss Clarkson was significantly larger body build than Mr. Spector. And
But she was taller than
Mr.
him.
Spector
She was
is
bigger
on
than two.
medication to
Oh yeah, 100%, Terry.
for
This guy is
tremors.
so full
Tremors
of himself.
are shaking type movements.
Okay. Does that generally cover the points that?
I think so.
Okay. I want to ask you some follow-up questions regarding some of those points, not all of them, of course, but when you talk about the tissue on the jackets, you're talking about the tissue that you looked at on the shoulders of the jackets for one, is that correct?
That's correct.
And was it your understanding that Dr. DeMaio directed that this tissue be collected from areas that weren't blood-stained?
Yes.
Okay, and was the reason for that, what was the reason for that, to avoid the blood-stained areas and collecting the tissue as far
Well,
as you?
so there wouldn't be a contamination of an area which is taken for examination.
Okay, in other words, you could look at
So you
just the
wouldn't get
tissue.
blood on top of tissue.
Okay, in other words, that would complicate looking at the tissue if there was blood mixed in.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so that was important. Then one of the sleeves, the same thing was done. Tissue was
Same
looked
thing.
at. Okay, and what does the tissue really tell you? You know, in other words, why does finding tissue on the shoulders and the other parts of the jacket make a difference to you? In other words, how does that factor in?
Well, this just is a manifestation of a gunshot wound into an area where there is tissue destruction.
Okay, in other words, the intraoral wound, tissue gets ejected.
Yes.
And it's on her.
Yes.
And how much was on Mr. Spector's jacket that he was wearing?
None that I know of.
How much was on his shirt?
None that I know of.
How about his pants?
What?
Nowhere.
Would you expect it to be there if he was in proximity to Mrs. Clarkson when the shot was fired?
Now, why wouldn't it be there if it's on her? So there isn't any.
So it's not the absence of evidence because it's on her.
Yes.
And it's not on him.
That's correct.
So all of that makes a difference, I take it.
That's correct. The anticipation would be, if he were the one involved, that it would be there.
In other words, if he was involved holding the
I'd say
gun,
that too.
firing the trigger.
That's correct.
Would the same be true with reference to blood spatter on his sleeve?
That on his, especially his right sleeve, yes.
If he's holding the gun with his right hand,
Right.
you'd expect to see it on his right sleeve.
That's correct.
And left hand, left sleeve.
That's correct.
And there was no blood spatter on either
On
sleeve.
either.
And we know that the blood spatter came out, correct?
What we do know, all we need to do is look at Lana Clarkson's,
Her hands,
her hands, her
jacket.
her clothes, yes.
What, Belle? You've had enough cookies.
Want to move on to some other areas briefly, Dr. Spitz. And one of the things that Mr. Jackson talked a little bit about was the fact that you charge for this case, but you mentioned that you do what's called pro bono work. Just in case somebody doesn't understand what pro bono means, can you tell the jury
I
what,
don't send a bill out.
no, what you work for free?
Yes.
Now, you've done that and you do that. Is that correct?
Sometimes I send a bill out for expenses. Sometimes I don't even do that.
Okay. And why do you do pro bono work?
Well, because I think that in a criminal case, everybody's entitled to the best type of defense.
Okay.
So I volunteer my services.
Okay. You've worked for innocence projects around the country.
I've done that too.
Same.
You want to get that like normal?
Do your opinions have anything to do with whether you're working for free or whether you're being paid? In other words, do your opinions change depending on those two circumstances?
No.
You've worked in this field for over 50 years, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and when you give an opinion or you look at an issue relating to forensic pathology, do you take into consideration what you've learned during those 50 plus years?
Well, yes. I do.
Okay. I take it that you've learned more as you moved along.
That's correct. It is unfortunate that, and I don't mean to imply that that happened in this case, but it is a fact, I think, that people do a job, they don't get trained, they make the same mistake on case 1000 as they do on case.
Excuse me.
The objection is sustained. The answer is stricken. The jury is admonished.
Fitz, when I take it this isn't the only case you've worked on in the last, since you were hired on this case, is that correct? You've got other
That's
cases?
correct.
You do some civil work, is that true?
Yes, a lot of it.
And you've been involved in criminal cases other than this one over the years, have you?
Yes.
And do you charge the same thing for all these
Yes.
cases when you do charge?
Yes,
Okay, and you've been hired by governmental agencies before, haven't you?
yes,
Prosecutorial agencies around the country, correct?
yes, and the U.S. Congress.
And you charge $5,000 a day when you,
Well, at that time, I did not charge $5,000 a day. That's in 1976.
okay. So when if you're hired today by a governmental agency, let's say a prosecutorial agency, you charge $5,000 a day?
I do.
Overruled. He's just saying that that's what his fee is, no matter who hires him. I'm going to allow the answer.
Well, I'll draw.
Okay?
Dr. Spitz, with reference to one question regarding the jacket that Mr. Spector was wearing, and there was blood on the slit below the elbow. There was a blood spatter probably above the elbow.
On the right arm in the back, about where I'm showing.
Okay. And did you give that a significance?
The significance that I gave to that is that it's a single blood spatter in an area where it doesn't belong, and suggestive, because it is in that location, that it's consistent with him holding his hand up like that.
Okay. And you're raising your arm?
When I say that, I mean across his face or across his neck or upper chest.
Not consistent with holding and shooting a weapon?
That's correct. Not consistent with holding or shooting a weapon.
Okay. So even though that one spatter was above the elbow on his right arm, that actually suggests just the opposite of shooting a weapon, correct?
Well, it's consistent with that, yes.
Okay.
There's probably other explanations for it, but that is one very credible.
And you know that there was, obviously, Mr. Spector took a rag.
So he had enough advance notice to shield himself with his arm when she shot herself? Yeah, that makes sense.
Wiped Miss Clarkson's face.
Yes.
So, and there were what appeared to be transfer stains on his coat from that event. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. There also was blood in his left pocket. Is that true?
Yes.
And was there, you were asked some questions about the doorknob and the door latch. There was actually two different items where there was some blood, and it was actually mixed blood, where there was two people's DNA, Lana Clarkson's DNA, presumably from blood, and also other people's DNA and Mr. Spector's DNA mixed together. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Now, when you look at a case like this and you have all these facts that don't deal with physical evidence. They're either statements or they're what somebody said to somebody else, either directly or indirectly. You take that information in, I take it as correct.
Yes.
Okay. Do you consider, when you hear all this information, and both from Ms. Clarkson and regarding Mr. Spector, you were provided with a wealth of information as to both individuals, is that true?
Yes.
And basically, the information regarding Mr. Spector, regarding these events that were alleged, you considered the possibility that he could have held the gun. In other words, you wanted to look at the physical evidence to see if that were true. Is that correct?
I sure did. That's the main point that needed to be either affirmed or dismissed.
And when you say physical evidence, you're talking about physical evidence, the scientific evidence that was collected and evaluated in this case. Is that true?
Correct.
And what did that scientific evidence tell you as to the question in this case that you were asked to answer, who was holding the gun when it was fired?
Well, according to the physical or scientific evidence, this is as I said before, a self-inflicted shot. That means Ms. Clarkson held the gun and fired.
Okay. And the state of mind evidence, the background material from Ms. Clarkson suggested that she was capable of doing that, correct?
Objection. Knuckles bleeding.
Testify.
Sustained just as a form of the question.
Did the state of mind evidence of Ms. Clarkson weigh into either affirming that conclusion or supporting that conclusion?
The state of mind at the time, as it is by background information in that short period of time preceding, or in that reasonable short period of time preceding, and as produced by alcohol and Vicodin acting together at that time, indicates depression. And depression goes up and down, but the alcohol doesn't go up and down. The alcohol was present at that time.
Okay. Let me ask you a hypothetical question, and listen carefully here, Dr. Spitz. Let's suppose that you have all of this information, but the physical evidence didn't support the conclusion. The scientific evidence did not support the conclusion that Lana Clarkson pulled the trigger. Then her state of mind evidence, how would you factor that in? In other words, the fact that she was depressed wouldn't mean anything?
I didn't get the question.
Okay. In other words, the fact that she was depressed, did that alone tell you what happened?
No.
Okay. The fact that she had consumed alcohol that night, that fact alone, did that tell you what happened?
No. The scientific evidence of blood spatter, gunpowder residue, all those things, and location and presence and presence in this one and absent on that one, and depression and alcohol and Vicodin and all these things together have to be considered together. That is what scientific evidence is. That is what features in to a determination of a forensic pathologist in determining manner of death. Cause of death, everybody knew right from day one. Mm-hmm. Manner of death is dependent on a lot more investigation and findings. And that's what this is all about.
Dr. Spitz, there were some facts and
Yeah, but what does Biggin always say about alcohol? It doesn't make you do things, it allows you to do things. So, if you're depressed and you're thinking about doing it, but you haven't done it yet, do you think you're going to go to a stranger's house and just because you've had alcohol, that's going to lower your inhibitions to the point that you're going to be going around this person that you've just met? You're going to be going around their home, opening doors, looking for guns? Is it going to lower your inhibitions to the point that you're going to want to do that at somebody else's house that you just met? I don't buy that because she had alcohol and Vicodin in her system, that she picked that point in time to do it. That makes no sense to me. I don't care what they say. That just does not make any sense to me at all. As a person with depression and who has thought about it before, I've never done it. I will never do it, but I have thought about it. I don't see that happening. Thank you, Judy. I just don't see that happening.
Circumstances that Mr. Jackson asked you about, I wanted to ask you some follow-up questions regarding that. Like, for example, there was some blood on the banister, and it was your understanding that was transferred there, presumably by Mr. Spector.
Yes.
And was it your understanding that that occurred sometime after he wiped the face?
I presume so, yes.
Does that tell you anything as to who shot the gun? That fact alone?
No, that is after the fact.
Okay.
That has nothing to do with who pulled the trigger.
Okay. In other words, it doesn't help you one way or the other.
No, it doesn't help me one way or the other. That's why it wasn't considered. I mean, it was, yes, I took notice. That's a better way of putting it.
Okay, but
I took notice that there was on the latch and on the doorknob and on the banister, and there was a rag and there was wiping of blood, and it explains why there is blood on this rag and why there's blood here, there, and other places. But who pulled the trigger, it doesn't tell you.
Okay. And are there a lot of facts that you looked at that basically didn't answer that question of who pulled the trigger?
The action that leads to determination of manner of death terminates with the pulling of the trigger.
Dr. Spitz, I want to finish up now by moving to another area briefly and talk about Dr. Pena and your review of his testimony. You actually heard his testimony. You also heard him testify about the breathing and what he told and what he testified to under oath at the grand jury. Was it your understanding that at the grand jury proceedings that he acknowledged testifying that there were a number of breaths that were taken by Miss Clarkson?
That's correct. And
No.
as far as I can remember, he also testified to that here. That's what I seem to remember. And he indicated in the autopsy report.
Saying, what is the question that we're going to?
I'll ask it right now, Your Honor.
Okay.
In the autopsy report, did Dr. Pena document information in there that suggested to you that there was more than one breath that Miss Clarkson took after the shot was fired?
What?
Calls for hearsay is asked.
It's not being offered, not for the truth of the matter asserted, but more importantly, it's as to whether he agrees or disagrees, I'm going to allow it. The objection is over.
Without limit, I have no problem.
All right.
There is, I'm sorry, may I answer?
Yes, thank you.
There is an abundance of blood.
Objection, this is non-responsive.
Well, I can't tell if it's going to be or it's not going to be. I'm going to allow him. If necessary, I'll strike the answer. Go ahead. Answer in your own way.
There is an abundance of blood in both lungs, described in the autopsy report as aspiration. Aspiration is an active, not passive, as opposed to passive, way for this blood to have gotten there. That blood cannot get there other than by this kind of a inhalation.
Okay.
Either that or by multiple smaller ones. But you need a strong pulling effect to allow that to happen. And the best way of judging that this was an active process, such as I've shown, is the relatively large amount and density of the blood in those air sacs that show up in the microscope.
Dr. Spitz, in your some 50 plus years experience, have you've done autopsies on people that have received traumatic injuries where they were instantaneously brain dead, is that correct?
Well, multiple. We get those in automobile accident. We got those in shootings. We get those in
It was a
beatings.
yes or no question.
Mankind is not very happy. It's not very pleasant to each other.
Okay.
So they beat you on the head with a baseball bat or something. These people are instantaneously brain dead.
Okay, and have you seen this finding before, other than in your
Yes,
experience?
I have. Absolutely.
Okay. If I could have a minute, I think I'm just about done.
All right.
Experts cannot just answer yes or no. Have you all
Thank
noticed
you,
that?
recross. All right.
Just a couple of questions, Dr. Spitz, and then we'll get you out of here.
Yes, sir.
The list that you have in front of you that you went over in detail with Mr. Plord, who wrote that list?
I did.
When did you write it?
Last night after, before I went to bed.
Did you have any input or help from Mr. Plord?
No.
Did you and Mr.
Help?
Plord discuss
You-
it?
No, we talked about, of course, we talked about some aspect of this case.
And Mr. Plord gave
But
you
they
some
didn't-
information that Mr. Plord.
I'm sorry.
I agree. Why don't you go ahead and finish your answer, sir.
We went and had dinner and we talked about a variety of things. We also talked about what happened in this case, but we did it every other time too.
And Mr. Plord, I guess what I'm asking you, Dr. Spitz, is Mr. Plord assisted you in coming up with this list of things that you just told the jurors.
No, he did not assist.
You did this completely
I knew,
independently.
let me say, please, let me say to you that this list is nothing new. I have testified the contents of this list since the inception of this testimony here. At least that's what my belief is. I have been aware of the contents of this list all through this case since I started reviewing it. So Mr. Plord or Mrs. Kenny Baden had no real input in this case, in this list.
But of course, you talked to both of them about the contents of this list.
No.
And the fact that you were going to give a list and Mr. Plord was going to ask you about a list today.
No, if you remember, please, I indicated earlier today that I make a list almost in every case. That is how I work up a case, so that when I go to court, I have a list in front of me that allows me to run through the findings. Not that I later on say, oh, damn it, I forgot this or that.
Dr.
This cannot
Spitz.
happen because I have it in front.
I'm asking you very simply, I'm not asking you about what you did in other cases or what you do in every other case. I'm asking you a very pointed question. When you were coming up with this list that you were going to tell this jury overnight last night, you worked with Mr. Plord, of course, the attorney who was asking you questions, correct?
Yes.
And you asked for the input or worked with Ms. Kenny Baden as well, correct?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the end, what you said.
And you also worked with Ms. Kenny Baden.
Of
She had
course.
some input. All right, so the three of you came up with at least, there was a discussion about this list, and Mr. Plord told you that I want you to get up on the stand tomorrow, and I'm going to ask you a question about reevaluating the evidence, and I want you to give the jurors this list. Isn't that how it happened?
No, they didn't tell me to make a list. They didn't tell me to come before the jury and read a list that they dictated to me.
But of course, Mr. Plord knew to ask you for this list, correct?
Well, he knew I told him I have a list.
And of course, he knew what was on the list because you worked with him last night and talked to him about it last night.
No. What he knew, the reason he knew what is in this list is because we discussed this list after it was done. So he knew what I have in the list.
You discussed the list.
We came
Last
here
night,
this
Doctor,
morning.
I understand you're trying to answer the question. I'm asking a different question now. After yesterday's testimony, wherein you said if the facts suggested that Mr. Spector was close enough to pull the trigger, you would have to reevaluate your findings in this case, your opinions and conclusions. Mr. Plord then went to you last night over dinner and said, we need to figure out what to tell the jurors about that answer. Isn't that correct?
No, the way this was left last night is that there was a question that remained unanswered, or at least not answered adequately. You asked a question, and I gave you half an answer. And this is my answer.
And of course, you indicated that this list represents, and I'll ask you a couple of quick questions about the list in just a second, but I want to follow up on something you just said a second ago. You indicated that this list is nothing new.
No,
correct?
It isn't.
That this is something that you've been thinking about and dealing with from the inception of this case, since you've been analyzing this case.
That's correct.
So when Mr. Plord said this is a reevaluation and you reevaluated the circumstances of that case, it's actually not correct, because this is just a regurgitation. Can I finish?
Sure.
This is just a regurgitation of what you've already testified to, correct?
Not what I already testified to, but this is a regurgitation of what I knew before I even put pen to paper.
So in fact, when you said that you were going to reevaluate the case based on the facts that I asked you yesterday, that being if Mr. Spector was close enough to pull the trigger, would that change your opinion? You actually didn't reevaluate anything. You just put down on a list things that you had already decided upon, correct?
Sir, yes, correct, because the content of this list, if you think back the early stages of my testimony, that from when I took this stand initially, you will find that everything, or by far most at least, of everything that is in this list was already stated.
All right, let's talk about that. You indicated that part of your evaluation was that there was no spatter found from the, I think Mr. Plord indicated, from the elbows down on the cuffs, correct?
On the coat.
On the jacket. I'm sorry, I should have said that. On the white jacket.
Yes.
All right. If in fact you were told that that's actually incorrect, that there is testimony that there's spatter on the sleeves down, would that change your testimony at all or change your evaluation?
Well, I'm not aware that there's spatter. There was a picture that was shown here.
Doctor, that's not what I'm asking you. I'm asking you if you were told that there was actually a small particulate blood matter that could reasonably be described as spatter from the elbows down on the cuffs, would that change your evaluation a little bit?
It may.
Excuse me, sorry. The objection is overruled. Go ahead and answer, sir.
It may do that, but I would not like to make my final opinion on this case based on a single finding. I would have to find some explanation.
I understand. I'm asking you. You gave us a list. I gotta do it some way, doctor. I gotta ask one at a time.
By all means, I don't want to interfere with your investigation.
All right. So in fact, if you were to find out, or you were to be told that there was spatter or small blood particulate matter that could reasonably be described as spatter from the elbows down on the white jacket, that would or might change your opinion, or you'd have to reevaluate based on that.
Might change.
Vegas, the location and quantity.
No, overruled. If he wants to add that in, that's his business. The objection is overruled.
You also indicated a series of things that you said were not, that you didn't find. In other words, you said that there was no GSR on the white jacket, correct? That was one of the things on your list about 5 down or 6 down.
That's right.
I want to make sure that we're very clear about this. You're aware that that white jacket was never analyzed for GSR, correct?
Well, that means that there is no evidence that there was.
That's not what I'm asking, okay? You're answering my question with a different answer. I'm asking, are you aware that that white jacket was never analyzed for GSR?
Yes, I'm actually aware of it.
Okay, are you aware that the sticky discs, so let me withdraw that with the court's permission and follow up on that. I want to make sure that the jurors are very clear and you're very clear about this. You're not saying that there was no GSR on the jacket. That has never been shown.
Let me put it better, because it was, if I said there was no evidence of GSR, it was not a good way to answer. There was no evidence of GSR on the jacket.
All right. Are you aware that there was a sticky disc that actually was taken from the sleeves of the jacket?
I think there was.
Are you aware that Lynn Harold, a PhD criminalist in this case, over at the crime lab, actually looked at that sticky disc under a microscope?
I'm not sure.
Are you aware that, in fact, in that sticky disc, she saw what she believed to be smokeless powder, unburned powder, or a particle of unburned powder in that sticky disc?
I have seen no such reference
Okay,
anywhere.
that's fair enough. Are you aware that she also saw red material that she thought may very well be blood in that sticky disc as well?
No, I'm not aware of that, and I have not seen anything
Okay.
related to that in the multiple records that I have.
Assume for purposes of my question that that's true, that there was a sticky disc taken from the cuffs of the white jacket and that unburned or smokeless powder was seen and red material that could reasonably be described as blood, or what a histologist, someone with a PhD in that area or that field believed may have been blood. Would that change your opinion at all? Or maybe ask it a little bit differently. Would you take that into consideration and reevaluate?
He changed his question before the answer came in. He just modified his question before the answer came in.
The end of that question, Dr. Spitz, I'm not trying to confuse you. I'm trying to stay consistent. Would you take that into consideration in your reevaluation?
I might, yes.
Okay. You indicated that there was, and again, this just may be a semantic thing, Dr. Spitz. I just want to clear this up. You said a couple times there was no GSR on the shirt, no GSR on the pants, no GSR on the cuffs of the pants, no GSR on the socks. You're aware that the shirt, and the pants, the cuffs of the pants, the socks were never tested for GSR, not that it came back negative. You're aware of that?
Anything that is white and a blood spatter is on it, you would almost not need to, well, I don't say you would not need to test it, but it's almost so obvious that you'd want to test it.
And of course, the shirt and the pants and the cuffs and the socks, they were all black, not white.
In Miss Clarkson.
No, on Mr. Spector. They were all black too, Doctor. Did you not know that?
Well, the coat was white.
Yeah, he was wearing all black. Did
Yes.
you not realize that?
Yeah, underneath.
Correct.
But I'm talking about the surface,
You're talking about the,
the white coat.
Dr. Spitz, I asked you about the shirt, the pants, and the
I'm
socks
sorry.
that you related
Yes,
to.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. All of that was black.
Yes.
It was never tested for GSR.
No, yes.
All right. You also said that there was no GSR in his ears.
On the what?
In his ears.
Oh, in his ears.
So I guess we can assume from your testimony that he didn't pull the trigger with his ears.
That he what?
He didn't pull the trigger with his ears.
No, that's not what I meant.
What did you mean by that?
When a gun is fired, there is gunpowder, flecks of gunpowder in the area. And if someone is going to be with any part of his body in that area, there is a good possibility that they may get gunpowder on them.
And that would include Lana Clarkson's hands, correct?
That it would include anything that is in the area.
And that would include, once again, Lana Clarkson's hands.
It would include her hands, it would include Mr. Spector's hands, it would include my hands if I went there.
And in fact, you indicated on cross-examination a little bit earlier that it is your opinion, based on all of the circumstances and facts that you know about this case, that Mr. Spector wiped his hands.
Yes, but he did not wipe his white coat, obviously.
I didn't ask about his white coat, Dr. Spitz. I asked about his hands.
I understand that, but
Did he wipe his
if
hands or
I'm
not?
making my opinion, I have to consider the area as a whole, not just the hands.
Dr. Spitz, you're
I
answering
realize.
a question I didn't ask. I'm simply asking you a very pointed question. Is it your opinion, I think you testified a little bit earlier on cross-examination, that there's evidence that Mr. Spector wiped his hands off?
Yes, that's correct.
Overruled.
And that, in fact, would remove GSR.
There's some debate about that.
There's debate whether wiping your hands off will remove GSR. Is that your testimony?
I am not an expert in that regard, but I do read the literature.
Okay, so we've
And
established.
there are
I'm sorry, go ahead.
And there are people who will tell you that you almost have to scrub your hands. You wash them intensely to get all GSR off.
Isn't it a fact?
Okay. We are going to stop there. Let me write down the timestamp. And the part. We are on part. Oh. 8, which is the last part. Yay, we're almost done with him. And we are at 44:58. Oh, is tomorrow Friday the 13th? Oh my gosh. Tomorrow's Friday the 13th, y'all. Tomorrow's Friday the 13th. Time for Friday the 13th marathon. I haven't watched that in a while. Cool. Okay. Thank you guys for coming out. It is time to go to the Karen Reed trial. The video will redirect. And we are going to catch up first on what we missed at the end of yesterday because StreamYard just didn't want to cooperate with us. So we're going to watch that. I might kill my dog while it's redirecting. No, I'm not. I'm going to get rid of the cookie jar. So the charging conference starts at 10. So we're going to try to get caught up with what we missed before we go to the charging conference. So I will see you guys over there. If you're not going to join us, I will see you tomorrow for Phil Spector. Be kind to people, love your family, and Jesus loves you, and so do I. Bye, guys.